I challenged myself to turn one of my favourite horror films, the cult classic Cube, into a first-person survival horror game.
Nailed.
The concept of Cube is simple but fascinating. Imagine waking up in a weird, scary place, not knowing where you are or how you got there. You know you have to find a way out, but here's the twist. You realise there are tons of rooms that look exactly the same, and some are filled with extremely dangerous traps. What would you do in that situation? I wanted to distill the essence of Cube into a first-person survival horror game to experience it for myself. Before we get started, if you enjoy this type of content and want to see more, remember to hit that like button and smash subscribe for more content just like this in the future. The first thing I needed to do was create the cube itself, which I did using Blender for the 3D modeling and Affinity Designer for the texturing. Each cube is an identical structure with strange alien-looking patterns on each wall panel and mechanical hatches in the center of each. The rooms themselves each have an assigned color, so I needed to make sure that I designed the texture in a way that would lend itself to this. For the game mechanics, I stole the first-person controller code I'd written from a different project, and after bringing the cube model into the game and adding collisions, I placed my unwitting player inside what would become a deadly maze that they would need to escape from. But one room wouldn't be enough. I needed the game to spawn in a new cube each time the player opened one of the doors, which turned out to be much harder than anticipated. Once I'd fixed the spawning logic, I needed to make sure that the two adjacent doors of the connected cubes opened and closed in unison. This proved to be quite a difficult task, and after running into issues for hours and a long shower to clear my head,
what I ended up doing was having each cube maintain references to the cube it was connected to for each door. This allowed me to check if a cube was connected to a particular door when it opens or closes, and call the same open or close function on the adjacent door. This worked great when a particular door was responsible for spawning the next cube, but not so much for when a cube had been spawned elsewhere, but now happened to be adjacent to a door that had no knowledge of it. What I ended up doing here was adding raycasts to each cube that would constantly check to see if a new cube had appeared that it didn't currently know about. If it detected one, it would store the reference to it in its connected cubes dictionary.
With this complete, it meant the players could freely wander around the cube and there would always be a new room for them to explore. But wandering an empty structure isn't what I was going for. There needed to be traps. Lots and lots of traps. The first trap I added was the spike trap. In the film, the trap is triggered by sound. Here, I trigger it when the player enters the room. The trap itself is a simple collision box that detects the player and triggers the spike animation. In the film, characters learn to use their boots to try and trigger traps to check if a room is safe before they enter it. I wanted to bring this feature into the game too, so I quickly modeled a boot and brought it into the game, allowing the player to throw them to trigger traps. If a room is safe, the player can enter the room and collect the boot again by walking into it. If the room is trapped, the boot will trigger the trap and it will be destroyed in the process. This mechanic gives players a sense of risk and reward. They could choose to chance it and enter a room without using a boot, thus saving it for later, or they could use it to check a room is safe before entering, but risk losing the boot in the process. The next trap I added was the flamethrower trap. This trap acts in much the same way as the spike trap, but I used particle effects to create the flamethrower's deadly appearance. Either one of these traps spells a grisly end for the player. With the traps in, I added a death animation and fade out. For the animation, I animate the camera in a falling motion and lock the player's controls before restarting the game. One thing that was missing from the game at this point was sound. It's surprising just how much sound can add to the atmosphere and increase the tension within the game. I scoured freesound.org for appropriate sound effects for things like opening of doors, boots clanging on metal surfaces, and of course the traps themselves. I used Audacity to slightly modify the audio. In the case of the spike trap in particular, I reversed it to create that creepy sound they make when they retract back into the walls. I also used Epidemic Music to find a suitably disturbing track for the background music. I took one of the stems, rather than the whole track, to turn it into more of an ambient background rather than a full song, which I think worked really well. At this point, the game was functionally complete, but it was still lacking a purpose. I knew I wasn't going to add an actual escape route, as I didn't want to frustrate players by making them locate an exit that could be literally anywhere within the randomly generated structure. So instead, I chose to add these randomly spawned cube collectibles to the game, and challenged the player to collect 5 of them to win. The collectibles spawn randomly within the cube, and sometimes players might have to leave one behind if it happened to spawn in a trapped room. This made the game much more satisfying to play, as now there was an actual goal and a win condition. The last thing I added was a fade to white animation once the player collects the 5th cube, symbolizing the player's escape into the light. After playing the game a few times and asking friends to give it a go, I realised it was a little bit too difficult to complete, so I added in a chance for rooms to occasionally contain an extra boot for you to pick up, increasing the chances players have to detect traps. I also tweaked the spawn rate of traps and collectibles to make the game a little fairer. And with that, the game was complete. I'm really pleased with how it turned out in the end. I think visually it really captures the essence of the film, and I love how ominous and tense the game becomes once you've collected 3 or 4 cubes and you've ran out of boots. Completing the game feels super satisfying, and I found myself playing it through several times. There were a number of things I'd originally planned to include that didn't make it into the final game. One of these was the numbers the characters in the film discover on the inside of each door. In the film, the characters discover a way to seemingly detect if a room is safe based on whether or not these numbers were prime. This would have been far too difficult for players, so I'd anticipated creating a more simplistic puzzle that players could use to detect safe rooms instead, which would give them an additional way to traverse the cube rather than relying on boots and chance alone. I would have also loved to add more trap variety to the game, and perhaps traps that aren't just instant death for the player, but that could be avoided if the player is quick enough to escape. There's so much cool stuff that could be added to this game, but now I'd love to hear what you think. Leave a comment down below if you'd like a follow-up video with more features, and let me know what you'd like to see added to the game in the future. If you'd like to try the game for yourself, you can find it on my itch.io profile, codewithtom.itch.io. Please do make sure to go and leave your feedback over there as well. If you enjoyed this journey as much as I did making it, smash the like button to show your support. Don't forget to hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you won't miss any of the action. There's a lot more cool stuff on the way, and I can't wait for you to see what's next. For now, I'll leave you with some footage of the finished game. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.